Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Get started in just a few minutes. Good to see all of you here, although I can't really see you.
I see you, Jamal.
It's good to be seen, Colleen. It's good to be seen. We have a really good presentation for you all today. We're excited to have Emma here. Love when y'all introduce yourselves in the chat. It's awesome. Welcome, welcome. I know there's been all kinds of crazy storms across the state. Last week when we spoke, there were a bunch of storms that were affecting the western side of the state, and people were losing power and all of the things. So I hope that everybody is recovering and people are starting to get their power back and all of the things. So hello, hello, hello. Be getting started in just a minute. Waiting for Emma to pop back on. There she is.
Hi, everyone.
All right. See, just trying to allow the people to get into the door before we get started. See if we can get as many people in as we possibly can. All right, so let's officially get started, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to our virtual speaker series for 2025. Today's webinar is titled My Ascension with Emma Bonoit, provided by the PA Care Partnership, which is a statewide system of care grant in association with the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, better known as OMSAS. It is a sensitive topic that we are addressing today, so we want to let everybody know to take care of yourselves. If you're feeling any feelings, things of that nature, please feel free to step away from the webinar and address your needs as they arise. And with that, we are going to turn it over to Emma so she can introduce the presentation.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for choosing to be a part of today's presentation. I am Emma Bonoit. I am from South Louisiana, where we are having a torrential downpour, which is very fitting for where we are in the South. And I'm happy to be here today to share my story and my lived experience of surviving a suicide attempt when I was 16 years old. I am going to share first, before I open up and kind of talk about my lived experience and all the things that I've overcome. I'm first going to be sharing a portion of my documentary film called My Ascension. It is a documentary film that I had the privilege of creating after my suicide attempt back in 2017. I worked with a local filmmaker to produce this documentary with the hopes of starting conversations and facilitating safe spaces where we can have discussions about mental health and suicide prevention. So this film serves as a vehicle for me to travel the country, sharing my lived experience, using my story and my voice to try and make a difference, raise awareness and ultimately provide hope. So there is some pretty sensitive parts in the documentary. I want to make everyone aware of that, just to serve as a trigger warning for anyone. It is about a suicide attempt, so just be aware of that. But ultimately, the purpose of the film and the execution of the film is one of profound hope. So it is my hopes that you will find something positive to take away with you as you leave this webinar today from my story. And with all of that being said, I would like to introduce the film clip from the documentary film, My Ascension. And afterwards, I will be joining you all to speak more about my story and then participate in a Q&A discussion. So that way you guys can be heard and we can facilitate a safe space. Thank you all for being here, and I will see you after the film clip.
June 7, 2017.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Please hurry!
911, what's the address of the emergency?
Please hurry! My daughter shot herself! Please, 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 may hurry! Please, may hurry!
Okay, they're on their way, okay?
Don't send me.
Okay, what's your name?
My name is Chelsea.
Okay, can you tell where she shot herself at?
It looks like she shot herself in the neck.
In the neck?
Yes, please.
Okay, is she breathing?
Yes, ma'am, she's breathing. Emma, stay with me, baby girl, please. Please stay with me.
How old is she?
She's 16.
She's 16. I'm going to tell you how to stop the bleeding, okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Get a clean, dry cloth or towel and place it right on the wound.
I have my hand on the wound.
Okay, I want you to say now every single time she takes a breath in, starting immediately.
Now. 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 Now.
Okay, is the bleeding controlled now?
I can't really tell now. She's still breathing, but there's shallow breath
She's
now.
still breathing?
Now. 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 I don't think she's kind of convulsing a little bit.
She's convulsing? Okay, but she is breathing. They're almost there. They're on the way to you, okay?
I'm sorry.
It's okay. You're doing a good job, okay?
I never hear it though.
Okay, you hear them? Okay, go open the door for him, okay?
Yes.
I just remember hearing the ringing in my ears. And I could taste the gunpowder. There was like 1,000,001 thoughts going through my head. The first one was, what did I just do? I don't want to die. No one's gonna know I didn't want to die. The next thing I remember was my mom coming in the room, falling to her knees, saying, oh my God, just keep breathing, just keep breathing.
Ascension Parish Police Detective called me and said that, Mr. Benoit, your daughter has shot herself. And I said, what?
So we go to the hospital and they put us in the room, and detectives and sheriffs and things like that come in and try to talk to us.
Then the doctors came in and sat down with us and told us that, you know, what they were going to try to do.
All of us grabbed hands right there, and we prayed right there in the room before he left. And I'm like, okay, now what? And he looks at me, he's right in the face, Dr. Connors. And I said, now what? He said, I'm going to save your daughter's life.
Seeing her in ICU with tubes everywhere and fluids being pumped from every which way and things like that was pretty damaging. She looked broken completely.
Say her name, Mommy.
Hi.
You're such a silly little girl.
Emma was fun. She was very charismatic. She loved to dance. She was always a performer.
My name's Ashton, Emma, and this is...
Eventually, she just got into cheering. She had a serious swagger to her up there. You know, the big stage, the loud music, the bright lights, all the people, and you and your team are up there doing their thing.
I didn't have a clue she was struggling. She hid it very well.
You start thinking immediately, where did I go wrong? What did I do? You know, why? Especially with somebody like her who was not one sign ever, you know, cheerleader, great grades in school, friends, popular. Not Emma.
Do it again. Yes.
The weekend before my incident, I was in New York for a 3-day trip. We went with a local photographer, and she made us feel like we were real models. It was a really, really fun trip. I was on an extreme high, and coming home, just, you know, things weren't going right for me, and I just constantly felt exhausted. For me to be just struggling with things internally and not really ever expressing the pains and the struggles, that played a huge role when I attempted to take my life. I thought what I was doing was best for everyone around me. If Emma Bonoit is gone, then no one has to think about her anymore. No one has to worry about her anymore. She's gone, and that's it.
That's a wrap! That was so weird. I thought we were all doing this in the beginning.
In middle school, I was picked on a lot. And my mom and dad would tell me, you know, don't show them that it bothers you, because if you do, then that's just gonna make them want to pick on you even more. And so I guess that it kind of stemmed from there. Like, if I show others that I'm weak, if I admit to everyone else that I'm depressed or have anxiety, then they'll want to do it even more. Like, and everyone would just think I was weak, and I just didn't want to have that. And I was always like super hard on myself with everything. Every little mistake I'd make, I would just be like, well, my life is pointless. Like, I don't even know why I'm alive. But no one could really tell, because I would just put a mask on. I like pretty much stayed in the same range, like on the outside. For as long as I can remember, I have struggled with anxiety and depression. And, well, it's the first time I've ever admitted that. My entire life, the first thing I would do when I was hurting was go tell my mom. Why is it that when we're hurting physically, we have no problem telling our family and friends, but when we're hurting emotionally or mentally, we tend to keep it to ourselves? If we don't tell someone about our pain, it will likely never go away. Silence will never keep us safe. The bullet went through my neck and exited through the base of my skull. It severed my carotid artery. That caused a lot of internal bleeding. They placed a stent in my carotid, and then all the blood went up to my brain and caused several strokes. And then they found a blood clot pressing down on my spinal cord from C5 to T2. You know, waking up in the hospital a couple days later, I truly didn't have a clue as to what happened or why I was in the hospital. My first thought was that I had been attacked, like beat up. And then as I started to come to and started to remember, oh, this is what actually happened. And that was a whole nother level of heaviness in itself. How was I capable of doing something like that? I just could not make sense of it. It wasn't until I found out that I would be paralyzed. That's when it kind of all started coming back. My parents weren't in the room, and the little nurse was in there, and she saw me staring at my legs. And I would look at my legs, I would look at her, look back at my legs, look back at her. She went out and got the other nurse that was on duty. And they both started to cry. And they were like, you were shot, and in return, you have a spinal cord injury, which is why you're paralyzed. And I couldn't talk, so
I started to freak out, and I don't remember. I guess it just sedated me even more. The only thing I could move was this left arm and this bum hand. I felt trapped in my own body.
People were texting, you know, please tell me what's going on with Emma, keep us updated. And so that's when Britton decided that we were gonna do a Team Emma Facebook page.
One of my buddies was thinking about maybe starting up a softball tournament for medical expenses and whatnot, and I was like, yeah, man, that actually sounds like a great idea. A week later, we have 4 softball fields rented out for us. And we have 28 teams ready to play some softball.
Hey, Emma, we're out here supporting you. We hope you get better soon. We're praying for you. We love you.
As far as instant support goes, you can't beat that. But I mean, I couldn't do anything else but pray the whole time. I'm having some serious conversations.
I spent 4 weeks in the ICU and then was transferred to a step-down unit in the same hospital and spent a week there. I didn't regain movement in my body until 2 months after my attempt. I was in inpatient rehab hospital and was working in physical therapy. So very tedious stuff, just little drills, little exercises to try to retrain the brain and stimulate the body again to get it moving. And that, to this day, is probably the most challenging thing that I've ever had to go through. Hey. Everything I thought was easy, it became hard instantly. Like, brushing my teeth was hard. Learning how to feed myself again was hard. They said, I may walk or I may not. They said there's a 1% chance that I will. I have a happy pill, a hair growth pill, a blood pressure pill, a muscle relaxing pill, a nerve pill.
Load him up, move him out, roll high.
I was doing outpatient therapy 5 days a week here, but felt like I needed to be pushed more. I discovered Project Walk through Instagram, and their primary focus is spinal cord injuries.
That looked good, Emma. How hard was that? Scale like 1 to 10.
Probably a 7.
Okay.
But the first day I did it, it was like a 9, so it's getting easier.
So we're getting a little bit better?
Yeah. I was watching a little boy walk yesterday, and I was like, I just don't understand how it's like comes so naturally.
Yep.
You know, like it takes so much, which side? It just takes so much energy for someone like me.
Yep. And they just do it like they don't even know what they're doing. They're just kind of like going through the motion.
And it's just like so hard to explain to people.
It is.
Because the first question that someone asks is always, well, why can't you walk? You know, like, what's that like? You
Yeah.
know?
I like that, the script font.
My mom actually recommended doing a website. And at first I was kind of like skeptical. I was like, you know, I don't know if I want to put it out there for the world to see what I really have been through and what I'm going through. And then one day I came across another suicide survivor's website. And I saw how many lives and people he's touching and saving. And I just was like, maybe my pain and suffering can help someone else. The response and the outpour of love and support was the reason why I kept doing it. Turned out that Kevin Hines, the suicide attempt survivor I had discovered online, was coming to Baton Rouge to premiere his new documentary. One of the producers had seen my blog and reached out to see if I would share my story on a panel after the screening.
Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Emma Bonoit.
Hey. I'm clearly nervous. So I'm probably gonna sound like I'm reading off of a script, because I am. So will you hold it for me? I got you. Sheesh.
We love you.
Yes.
So,
My name is Emma. Obviously, I'm kind of congested right now, right? I'm 17, and a little over 8 months ago, on June 7th, I attempted to take my own life. I guess from the outside looking in, I had an ideally perfect life. I was happy, outgoing, and always smiling on the outside. But what no one knew was anxiety and depression had taken over my life, and I didn't even know it. I was always ashamed of the way I felt, and I thought that if I opened up, people wouldn't look at me the same. So June 7th, things got just too dark to where I couldn't even imagine a life anymore. I felt that there was no other way out. So I knew my dad had a gun, and I pulled the trigger. And as I lied there, hearing the blood pour out of the back of my neck, the only thought going through my head was, oh my gosh, I do not want to die. Oh my gosh, I do not want to die. But on a hopeful note, I was saved that day. And now, thankfully and humbly, I'm fighting to live a happy and healthy life. The one thing I'm certain of is I just know that if it saves at least one person, or even helps one person to just stand up and be like, hey, look, that's me, you know. I have those feelings and I have those thoughts. And not to be ashamed of it, then it's worth it.
Woo.
After I spoke, just the amount of people that came up to me and were just so impacted and inspired and moved by what I had to say, that was the biggest reward. One of the people I was on the panel with at the premiere was Tanja Miles, and she offered to meet with me and help me with my mental health recovery. So I don't really know much about your story, because I mean, I was having a little panic attack whenever you were telling it, but it's probably a very long story.
I'm gonna break it down to you in like 1 minute. 7 years old, molested, 10 years old, sexually active on my own. The first time I tried to commit suicide, I was 13. I ended up getting my stomach pumped in the hospital. Unlike you, I know I heard your story and you said that you regretted after you did it. I was mad that it didn't happen. I wanted peace just that bad because my mind was so tormented. So, you know, I can't wait to, you know, for us to talk more.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't wait to hear your story, and what you're doing is like amazing. I think you're so brave.
Thank you.
I mean, how you feeling?
Every day is different, you know. It's hard to, like, come to terms with everything that I went through and everything that I was thinking, but I'm doing it.
So what I do, I get to wake up every day and help people who have issues with mental health or substance abuse, and I'm a peer support specialist or recovery specialist.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when I look at you, I see, you know, you doing the same thing, you know, you being, you know, a counselor, you know, being a person that's going to be able to tell people, you know what, I've been there, done that, and there's hope. So I think that, you know, you and I working together, you know, I'll tell you this all the time, I'll be your biggest cheerleader, you know, but I'm like, Emma, when I ask you, like, are you good? And you say, yeah, I'm good, yeah. And I'm like, all right. And then if you tell me you're good and you're not, I'm going to get in your face.
Yeah.
And we're going to have some talking to do. So.
Oh, look, I believe that, because that was my biggest thing. Like, I always would wear a mask and, like, tell people what they wanted to hear. And, you know, and that kind of got me in trouble. I mean, it is the reason why I'm where I'm at right now.
Attempted to take my own life doesn't make me any kind of expert in suicide prevention. So I wanted to learn more from the nation's leading experts. Dr. Ray Tucker, who I'd met at the premiere, invited me to come to LSU to meet with him and some of his colleagues.
So unfortunately, suicide is a huge problem worldwide, but here in the United States, we've actually seen suicide rates increase by 33% since 1999. We know that almost 10 million people a year will experience very serious thoughts of suicide. Maybe as high as about 2.5 million will start to plan a suicide attempt. And then we think there's about 1.1 to 1.2 million suicide attempts every year. And that results in about 45 to 46,000 deaths per year.
What would you say is the most effective form of prevention that you've seen firsthand?
One of the best ways to interview somebody who's struggling with suicidality is get on the floor with them. And that's usually not physically what you're doing.
But
You're
get on their level.
Get on their level. Like, take some time to let yourself feel that
be
level
compassionate,
of
yeah.
pain and not just click your boxes.
Yeah.
And it's so hard to do when your medical system, oftentimes you got to get people in and out.
Uh-huh.
It doesn't make that easy. It takes
Yeah.
time and it takes training. And we've got a long ways to go to getting people trained in that kind of suicide prevention.
Before my attempt, I didn't really know suicide was that common. And I certainly didn't know that every day in the US, 20 young people die by suicide. In 2018, about 7,600 young people took their own life. That's equivalent to losing the entire student bodies of 9 high schools in 1 year. For every 1 death by suicide, hundreds of people are impacted for life. Moms, dads, brothers, sisters, grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, classmates, teachers, and the list goes on and on. Well, thank you all for taking the time to watch that film clip from the documentary film, My Ascension. Like I said before the film started, I hope that through learning a little bit of my experience and my journey, you were able to take something positive away from it. It's never my intention to upset anyone or trigger anyone's negative feelings or emotions, but it's always my goal to raise awareness, spread positivity and hope, and ultimately remove the stigma. I overcame so much in my journey of recovery and healing. And the biggest thing that I am grateful for is the ability to use reflection and think about the things that I've overcome in my journey. And so one of the things I'm really proud of is the fact that people and organizations like this one come together to learn from people with lived experience. I firmly believe that we can learn from one another and that we have a lot more in common than we don't. And so I'm grateful that you had the chance to watch the film clip before I expound upon my story and answer your questions. I think this is a great opportunity for people who have burning questions and maybe some raw questions that they would like to ask from someone with the perspective that I hold of being in a dark place and attempting suicide. We often don't get the opportunity to hear from people who have attempted suicide because so many people are losing their lives tragically to a death by suicide. So I feel really grateful for my ability to be able to provide answers and reassurance, maybe even, and ultimately hope. Going through what I went through, I had to not only face what happened to me, but why it happened. And so I went on a journey of physical recovery, which you saw in the film, but also a mental and emotional health recovery as well. And that journey for me has been one of the most eye-opening experiences that I have ever had in my life. Being able to, like I said, use reflection, think about how my mind was operating and the thoughts that I was having at that time, and compare it to this new profound perspective that I have is something that I'm really grateful for. So one of the things that I always bring up when I share my story is the importance of safe spaces. You heard Dr. Ray Tucker talk about getting on the floor with someone, getting to a place where they feel comfortable and safe being so vulnerable with you. And that is exactly what I had the opportunity to do after surviving my suicide attempt. I was equipped with so many healthcare providers who really wanted to help me succeed in my journey of healing. And so the biggest thing that really helped was, like Dr. Ray Tucker said, getting on the floor with me, getting to my level. So many people, and especially so many young people, are hurting and struggling with a number of things, regardless of what the factors are, whether it's pressures academically, whether it's the expectation to succeed, perfectionism. All of these things are very real experiences that humans go through, especially our young people. They are going through these struggles in silence, like I was, really afraid to be vulnerable, really afraid of opening up and being raw with how you feel. And so, one of the best ways to combat that insecurity in people and that fear of opening up is to simply let someone feel safe with how they feel in a setting with you. Therapy for me has been one of the best tools that I've been able to utilize. It's given me the skill set, it's given me the knowledge and the awareness of my own feelings and my own thoughts and my own emotions. So I'm able to navigate my own struggles, life's challenges, fears, frustrations, all of the things that we as humans have kind of as a society learned how to avoid. I've learned how to face head on and overcome with healthy skills and healthy, positive coping skills. And so, one thing that I always encourage people to really pay attention to is how you're showing up with the people that you love and support. My family came along this journey with me. My recovery was a journey that was shared equally with my family. My mom, my dad, my brother, and even my grandparents have since taken the initiative to learn ways that we can better support each other and show up for each other in a safe, comforting, open environment where when someone is struggling, we know what our role is as opposed to trying to fix the feeling, trying to fix the problem, trying to give what I like to call toxic positivity. I know a lot of us are guilty of that from time to time. So we've all kind of learned together how to better serve one another in terms of mental health. And that's been really profound for me to come through with my family. And I'm really grateful that I have been afforded a second chance at life, a second lease on life, to be able to take these necessary steps at getting myself the help and support that I needed, and also in turn, getting my family and friends to recognize that mental health is something that affects all of us. We all have mental health. It impacts each and every one of us living life, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's nothing to look down upon, which are all old narratives that I was telling myself when I was struggling myself as a young person because of society's stigma around these struggles, around these types of treatments that people are seeking out. Myself, I definitely struggled with the thought of judgment and the fear of criticism and the stigma. The stigma is a huge factor as to why so many people feel so alone, as to why so many people feel like their feelings and their struggles aren't valid or are somehow unjustified. And we hear it all the time when someone is struggling or going through a hard time. They themselves are often in a place of self-invalidation, maybe even some denial of what they're feeling. And it's easier to write off someone's feelings as attention seeking or they should just get over it, suck it up, other people have it worse than you. This sort of bootstrap mentality, like I like to tell people, the pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality has kind of plagued our society when it comes to mental health and mental health treatment. And for a long time, I felt sort of trapped by that stigma, sort of stuck in this place where I felt like if I were to open up, if I were to be vulnerable, if I were to choose to tell someone how badly I was feeling and the thoughts that were coming to my mind when I was feeling so badly, that they would look at me differently. I was terrified that if I would just take that step and reach out for help, that no one would see me the same, that somehow, some way, my image would be tainted, that people wouldn't view me the same as they view me without knowing that I struggle with my mental health. I really felt this need to protect this image and personify this person who was untouched by struggle, this person who was void of challenge, this emotionally resilient person. This is the image that I maintained because of the stigma and because of my fear of rejection and my fear of judgment of others if I were to open up and tell someone how badly I was hurting. And so many people, especially so many young people, are walking that same walk right now. So many young people in our society, in our nation, in our communities are feeling these feelings, this isolation, this hopelessness, this lack of a will to live and keep going. So many young people are feeling these feelings just like I was, but they're not reaching out for help. They're not telling trusted adults. They're not turning to resources because of this stigma. I firmly believe that this stigma is our biggest, I guess, what's the word? I'm thinking of like story, like protagonist and antagonist. Like the stigma is kind of just that thing in our society, that barrier. Thank you. Yes, that barrier in our society that keeps people from feeling like their feelings matter, like their experiences are valid. And so my biggest goal with sharing my story is to, like I said, raise awareness, spread hope, spread positivity. But ultimately, my biggest goal with sharing my story is removing that stigma. I want the stigma to not have a place in society anymore, because the reality is humans struggle. It doesn't matter who you are or who you're not. Oh, my light just died. It doesn't matter who you are or who you are not, or where you come from or what you have or what you don't have. The stigma impacts us all. Mental health impacts us all. And so I am on a firm mission to remove that stigma from our society, so that way people who are struggling know that it's okay not to be okay. And when they're struggling, they feel empowered to be vulnerable and share how they feel and get the help and support that they're needing. Because had I not been impacted or affected by the stigma, chances are I would have reached out for help. Chances are I would have not felt so ashamed of my own feelings because of what the world and society were telling me to feel. And so with all that being said, I really hope that through watching the clip from the documentary and through hearing me expand upon my why and my recovery piece, I hope that you all are able to take valuable information away from my story today. I hope that as you leave this webinar, and as we get into the Q&A, we can all come together and learn innovative ways to remove the stigma in our own life. I always encourage people to be an advocate, be your own advocate. Change happens when one person decides to step up and make a difference. And so the more that we are advocating for positivity and the more that we are advocating for mental health change in our world, the better we will be as a collective. So just be encouraged that your voice matters and your presence matters. And by showing up in someone's life, letting them know that you are there for them, letting them know that you aren't afraid or ashamed to hear about their deep struggles and their dark moments, and that you're welcoming of those kinds of conversations, the better off we'll be as a whole in society. So with all that being said, I know I rambled on for a good little bit, and my light died in the process, but I think we have some questions in the Q&A that we can get started with. Jamal, if you want to cue that up.
Yep, I got you. Thank you so much for sharing, Emma. Very powerful story on a very important topic that I think we need to talk about it more. We need to talk about the hard things. I'm a proponent of talking about hard things so that people understand. And the work that you are doing in sharing your story helps to promote that. So I really want to thank you for that. We have a number of questions in the Q&A. So hopefully we have some time. So hopefully we'll be able to get through them all. Diana would like to ask, what signs should we be looking for and what questions should we be asking?
So I would say the number one sign to pay attention to is character changes, behavior shifts. I myself did not present any of the standard typical signs that are oftentimes taught in your suicide prevention and suicide assessment trainings. I was not displaying any kind of outward hopelessness or outward depression. It was all internalized within me. But the thing that was changing was my behavior. I became extremely triggered from small, minor setbacks. I had a very low tolerance for frustration. So I would say pay attention to what is pretty normal and what is baseline. And kind of, if you start to notice that they are behaving a little differently, maybe they're snapping at me a little bit more, or maybe they're isolating, maybe they're staying inside their rooms more, they're not coming out to dinner, they're not conversating with us as frequently. Things like that are really important to pay attention to. I also tell young people, be aware of, the reality that hurt people, and, never assume that someone who is being mean or bullying others is necessarily coming out of a malicious place. We all feel feelings that make us think thoughts, and they kind of go hand in hand. So just be aware of what's typical for someone and notice those subtle shifts and changes in their behavior and character. It would be the biggest thing to kind of be on the lookout for, I would say.
Yeah. How did you manage to hide your struggles from your loved ones? And um, what are some things that you wish that they would have noticed?
So oftentimes when I would be struggling and a moment of crisis would arise, that's when those thoughts of suicide would be the most prevalent. I would be coasting, doing well, successful, doing good in school, not in any drama with my friends, not in any trouble with my parents, and everything would be good. And then something bad would happen, a moment of crisis, a trigger, a failed test, a breakup with boyfriend, a fight with mom or dad, and that's when those thoughts and feelings of suicide would be most prevalent. So the biggest thing that looking back, and my parents looking back, we can all say we should have done better, was to leave space for the emotional struggle during a challenge or a crisis. Anytime I would get in trouble or face a challenge, it was always first about correction. And what really needed to be happening was that connection. So had they addressed the things that I was misbehaving and doing wrong from a place of connection as opposed to always correction, I think things would have felt a little safer for me to be able to open up and be truthful and vulnerable with what I was feeling that was leading me to behave in those ways. I think that's just the biggest thing, is really realizing that the way we think affects the way we feel, and the way we feel affects the way we behave. But in terms of how I masked those feelings and those thoughts, was just keeping that image alive and essentially telling people what I knew that they wanted to hear from me to protect not only myself, but to protect them. And I see it all the time with young people. They don't want to hurt or upset the adults in their life. So oftentimes they will tell you, oh, yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay. Everything's fine. But to get below that surface is really where we want to kind of be starting at.
Thank you. Amanda ask, when you know that someone is in a dark place and they continue to push you away, deny, and/or refuse help, what can we do?
It's so hard when someone is aware that someone is struggling and you want to give them help and you're asking them to seek help and you're encouraging them to seek help and they're resistant to it. But one way that I always encourage people to sort of combat that is to open up your vulnerabilities with them yourself. Sometimes hearing someone's experiences where it was a hardship or it was a struggle or it was a challenge can make the person struggling who's resistant to help realize that they're not alone. And so many times we can tell people the importance of seeking help for their mental health, but it comes across differently when we approach that conversation through a lens of relatability and we use our own experiences to say, hey, look, man, I know what it's like to struggle with, X, Y, or Z. I myself have been in that dark place before. And something that really helped me get through it was therapy or whatever resource you're trying to encourage them to seek out for themselves. Just using your own experience to be able to relate is really profound. So never underestimate the power of your own story and your own lived experience.
Sure. We have an anonymous attendee who asks, how would a parent ask their child if they are feeling like hurting themselves so that they might tell you?
I think it's really important to preface before having this conversation that anything is safe on the table with you, and let them know that you are aware that sometimes human beings suffer with thoughts of suicide. Saying that word, putting it on the table, getting on their level, like Dr. Ray Tucker said, and then putting it on the table, saying that phrase. I know that sometimes when people are hurting really badly, that they think thoughts of suicide. Are you thinking thoughts of suicide? And if you are, it's okay. It's safe with me. We will get through it together. Literally comforting that sentence and that word around suicide is the way to make someone who is struggling feel that sense of safety, opening that dialogue up. But saying the word, I know that there's a myth out there that suggests that if we talk about suicide, if we use that word, it's going to give someone the idea, when in reality, it does the opposite. It gives someone the freedom to embrace and express that that's how they're feeling. So saying the word suicide and making it a normal word that you use with your loved ones is very important.
Totally agree, Emma. I think, especially when you say the word, it takes away the shame component, right? Like, because I think sometimes when we're dealing with hard things and we're having these feelings, we don't want to be feeling these feelings, but we are, and so we feel shame that kind of comes with that. And when you put it out there in the way that you're suggesting, it gives that person that room to open up and be like, oh, okay, this is a safe place and I can share these thoughts without this person kind of um, flying off the handle, if you will. So I think that's great advice when you're thinking about addressing this topic with someone. So thank you for that. We have another question. I've heard before that people have second thoughts about their decision. Were you surprised by your thoughts or realization that you did not want to die?
I have heard both sides of the experience. I've heard that sometimes people do have second thoughts and maybe even some disappointment after a survival from a suicide attempt. But my experience was the opposite of that. Immediately after my attempt, I felt an instant regret, like you heard in the documentary. And that regret has been the catalyst that has set my emotional recovery into action. While I had moments where I felt sad and sorry about the situation and how things unfolded, I had more moments of optimism and hope because I knew that despite all that I had been through and all that was to come, there was nothing worth ending my life. I really realized that in that moment, it was not about dying or not being alive. It was about wanting the circumstances of my reality to feel and look different. I wanted my reality to feel different. I wanted my internal emotions and the way that I was processing thoughts and then feeling about thoughts and situations. I wanted it all to feel and look different. So it was never about not being here. It was about wanting change. But the problem with thoughts of suicide is that it's a trick. It's a trick of the brain. It is a lie and it is a trick that convinces a person who is in that type of thought process that this is the option, this is the solution, when in reality, suicide is never a solution. It is a temporary thought and emotion.
Mhm. Thank you. Someone asked, looking back, do you think that there were signs or symptoms you were experiencing that your loved ones could have noticed if they were more educated in mental health?
Absolutely. Before my attempt, pretty much no one in my family had heard the words mental and health used together. We were completely in the dark of what to be aware of and what to look for, my family and myself included in myself. But looking back, there were certainly things that, if there was that education, could have been picked up on. The first one that comes to mind is that I had been a cheerleader my whole life. It was my passion. It was my livelihood. It was my life. I loved it. And then my senior year, I decided not to try out. So I gave up that passion. I had lost the interest, lost the desire to be a good athlete, to show up for my team. So that was a very big warning sign that kind of went missed because of the fact that they didn't have the tools and the awareness of what to look for. So things like that, not trying out for cheerleading, becoming super angry and aggressive for minor frustrations. Like I said, my tolerance for any kind of frustrating experience was so low. So I became very angry and very isolated. I was in my room more times than I was not. I was not coming down for dinner anymore. I was not engaging in family time. I was not an active part of my family towards the end of my junior year, which was the peak of my depression. So those are some things that were being displayed that if they would have been aware, they could have picked up on.
Yeah. It's interesting listening to you talk and some of the things that you were feeling and experiencing at the time. And I think it's the important thing to note in that is have a conversation, right? Because I think sometimes, especially as adults, we get to a point, especially those who remember being teenagers and things of that nature. It's like you get a moody teenager, and a lot of things are changing around that time. So you flopping back and forth, and teenagers change their minds all the time. They do a bunch of things, and I think sometimes as adults, parents, we look at those things as typical teenage behavior, right? But it doesn't hurt to ask questions and to have a conversation, right? To just be in touch and say, so why don't you want to do that anymore? Or, things of that nature. And I think once you open that door, you have room to have conversations to maybe be able to see those different things.
Yep.
Yeah, you saying what you said made me think about that in a different way, because it is. I think sometimes we look at teenagers as just things as just typical teenage behavior, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting curious, unpacking those things, is
Mhm.
really important.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Tina says, we had a very close friend died by suicide almost 3 years ago. Sorry for your loss, Tina. The one thing that bothers me the most is what he was feeling right before he did the action. What was going through your mind? Were you scared, and who are you thinking about? Um, these are the hardest questions that we have to deal with.
Mm. I think when it comes to where my mind was at in that moment, I definitely empathize with that girl. I feel very sorry for her. I feel very bad for how she felt in that moment. And
Yeah.
I know that when we have an experience, we now have empathy because we ourselves have had that experience. It's hard to empathize with someone's experience when we've never really walked that ourselves. So that's kind of why I think sometimes people look at people who struggle with suicidality and die by suicide as selfish. Um, because, when you lose someone to suicide, you only have your experience of the loss. So I definitely empathize with your experience of the loss, but at the same time, I do also empathize with the experience of the individual who did die by suicide. So I think it's important to leave space for both experiences, but ultimately in that moment, I was thinking very irrationally. I was not thinking very clearly. I was looking at life in black and white. I tell people that it's kind of like looking through a straw, very tunnel vision. And in the moments when mom and my family and my loved ones would surface in my mind, my mentality was so skewed in that moment that I firmly believed that I was a problem, that I was causing more hurt, more stress, more frustration, more challenge, more burden in their life than I was bringing good to it. And that's the trick of suicide. That's the faulty thinking that people who are in suicidality are experiencing. So in those moments, as hard as it is for me to even admit that when I thought about my family, I thought more about how much of a burden I was to them and not really at all about the aftermath. And that is the most upsetting one of the most upsetting things about suicide is that people who are struggling with thoughts of suicide aren't able to realize how much of a hole it's going to leave in others' lives. Um, but looking back, I definitely can use that perspective to be able to relate with both sides of the experience, both the person struggling with suicidality and, of course, the person who's lost a loved one. So it was really hard in that moment to overcome those thoughts. And like I said, my brain was not working properly. It was just not thinking rationally. It was not thinking clearly. Had a lot of lies that I was believing in that moment.
Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it. So Joni wants to know, do you personally have advice for something or some way that a person could have brought out your feelings before you attempted to take your life and intervene and had them intervene in any kind of way?
Hmm. So is she referencing like if there was a trained professional?
Or even somebody personally that may have been able to reach you, get you to sort of engage you in a way that made you open up and discuss what it was that you were feeling. Um,
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind when I hear this question is because I think about hypothetically, if someone were to talk to me in that moment and kind of help me navigate those thoughts, what would have helped me to overcome that? And the thing that comes to mind is if someone were to acknowledge that I was feeling suicidal, but not try to guilt trip me out of that thought and feeling by telling me how much it would hurt others.
Mhm.
But instead of that, telling me that there is help and there are resources that I can use to help myself have the will to live. Because I think oftentimes when someone acknowledges and is helping someone who is actively suicidal, their first instinct is to convince them of reasons why not to feel that way. And it may help some people, but myself personally, I don't think that it would have helped to have someone tell me how much pain it would cause my loved ones, but I know that it would have helped if they would have acknowledged that I am feeling this way and that there's help for me to feel like I want to live. I think that would have made the biggest difference. Oftentimes when people are struggling with thoughts of suicide, it's human instinct. We want to protect each other. We want to save each other. We want to keep each other here. So our mentally well mind is going to think about all of the things that we want to encourage them to see the way we see. But when someone is dealing with suicidality, their mind is not seeing the things that you see in the same light. So it's important to really address where they're at and get them to find the help that they need so that way they have the will to live for themselves and not because they were guilt tripped to not feel suicidal because so many loved ones would be left behind.
Agreed. So it's like suicide is a very personal thing, and I don't think people think of it as that. Uh,
Mhm.
it's about the individual, not everybody else.
Mhm.
And I think that just what you said is important because, I think people don't realize that, saying all of those things about other people, although those things may be true, but in
Mhm.
the moment, that individual it's about it's about that individual. So I thank you for that answer. It's awesome. Um, someone says, what skills did you find you use the most? What advice would you give mental health therapists that would help a teen struggling with suicidal ideation?
Mm.
What kind of skills do you think would be beneficial?
So the first kind of therapy that I will say really made the biggest difference was um, cognitive behavioral therapy. That one for me was really significant. And the skill that I use and teach other young people to use is called evidence-based thinking. And it's essentially just debunking the lies and the myths that your brain is telling you and using your real life as evidence to kind of combat those what I call ants, those automatic negative thoughts that most of our young people are fighting every single day, but don't really know that they're fighting those thoughts every day. So really using real life evidence to combat these fears and these thoughts about ourselves and the way that others are perceiving us, because a lot of struggle for young people is around the way that they're seen and the way that they're perceived by their peers, by their parents, by their coaches, teachers, the adults in their life. So really kind of working to build that healthy pathway in the mind to say, okay, this is just a thought. This is not my reality. I am not my thoughts. I am the person that receives my thoughts and has the ability to process my thoughts, but I am not my thoughts. And really learning and teaching them how to detach their identity from their struggles and their feelings. My identity was all wrapped up in what kind of day I was having. If I was having a really bad day, I was the worst person on the planet and I didn't deserve any good things and everyone hates me and it's for a good reason because I'm just a terrible person because I did that bad thing. So we've got to kind of work around that. So really teaching them how to build healthy senses of self, how to build strong identities around true real life characteristics and not constantly attaching their identity to their day or their behavior or their mood or their attitude. Those have been some of the biggest tools that I've utilized and still utilize even to this day. Like, full transparency, yesterday I had a pretty rough day. It was just not my day. Bad things happen in threes, and yesterday they happened in multiples of three for me. So it was just a rough one. And I was having to rely on that skill set to get myself out of that mental rut and remind myself that a bad day doesn't equal a bad life. So I think it's about really helping them reframe those perspectives.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. Lisa wanted to know, when you're healing aloud, did you return to school? She references knowing that peers can be judgmental. So, how were you received, and how did you deal with the quote unquote whispers behind your back, those kind of things?
So I unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately for me, I never returned back to campus. I finished my school year out online and graduated with my class. However, I did become aware of a lot of the opinions and the rumors and the stories that were circulating, not only my school, but my community. And one of the ways that I chose to deal with that was by taking the power back of my own story and creating a website. That's why I created Life Rejuvenated, my blog, was to use my voice and tell people my story from my perspective, because people had their own versions of my story and their own kind of ideas of what happened and why it happened. And so I really took the initiative to not let their words affect me in a negative way. I used my therapist to give me that strength in remembering that hurt people, and you know, people love a good story. So, when something happens in a community, especially a smaller community, people are going to run with it. And that is kind of comes with the territory of this. I was always aware of that, but I decided to take my voice back and take the power back and share my story. And the response and the feedback was so overwhelmingly positive that it actually gave me the courage to continue sharing my testimony and got me the opportunity to make the documentary film. So, all in all, the response and the feedback is why I'm here today.
Sweet. Thank you. Margie would like to know, did your family end up in counseling? Did they get help with counseling, therapy?
Yep. My whole family, my mom, my dad, my brother, we all got our own therapists, counselors, and then eventually we got into some family dynamic therapy counseling, and it was really, really impactful. My dad is still in therapy. He still has a therapist, so that's been fantastic. I myself still have a therapist. So we've all kind of used this experience to propel us to grow in ways that prior to this happening to us as a family, we would have never thought that we would have needed to grow in these ways. But it's pretty profound, the changes that I've been able to see in my family and myself since going to therapy. And I will always advocate for therapy. I think it is a great tool and resource that we could all utilize. I know there's a stigma around therapy. No one wants to admit that they're going to see a shrink or a counselor. But I try to combat that with education and letting people know that for me personally, therapy has been kind of like a gym membership for my brain. It's given me skills. It's made me resilient. It feels good to strengthen your emotional self with the support of a therapist. So.
I love that. Therapy is a gym membership for your brain. I agree 100% wholeheartedly. The most well person could use a therapist. I
Yes.
say that all the time. So yes, therapy is a gym membership for your brain. I couldn't
Yeah.
agree anymore. This question is deep, so bear with me. I want to thank you for sharing your story. Uh, this person is also a survivor. They were never open about their struggles before or after their attempt. Um, their parents to this day do not know, and their father died by suicide a few years ago. My what if always plays in the back of my head. What if I was open about my attempt? Would that have saved my father and made him open up about his struggles? I know it's just a merry-go-round of an what if, but is there anything you'd suggest one could do to overcome this?
Oh man, this one's raw. Thank you for being so vulnerable. I really appreciate you feeling safe enough to say that and share that. And oh, that is a perfect way to describe it, a merry-go-round of hypotheticals.
Mhm.
But I'm glad that you recognize that that is what it is, and you're conscious of the fact that you can spin yourself into a spiral if you stay on that merry-go-round, if you stay on that ride of hypotheticals and the what ifs of it all. A loss by suicide is always very complex and tricky, and we can't prevent something that we can't predict. And it sounds like you weren't able to predict this, as many people aren't able to predict it. And of course, I understand where you're at. You're internalizing it and you're kind of attaching it, to your own experience and going through the motions of what could have been and all of those. And I definitely give you grace, and I hope that you can give yourself grace to navigate that. And the first thing that came to mind when he asked the question that you asked was, and this might sound crazy to some people here, it's kind of new age, but AI, Chat GPT, is a free app, and I myself have utilized it to give me strategies of how to overcome some very nuanced things. And this, what you're dealing with, sounds pretty nuanced. Um, so I encourage you to ask how you're, get some advice, ask some questions of how you can overcome this cycle that you're in and see what it comes back with. My experience with AI services is that it, I think my computer's dying. Hang on one second. It really, for me, it's been great. So that might be something that could help you. If you don't already have a therapist, to kind of get some help navigating this struggle. But for me, ChatGPT has been great, and it feels a little weird promoting that. But I guess this the times that we're in, right?
It is. It is. It's an interesting thing because, with everything that we uh, deal with in society today, and the different views that people have about internet AI and those things, for you to use it in a way to help you in your mental health, I think is ingenious. Like I always try to tell people that these things are resources, and the more that we understand them, the more useful they can be as resources. And it seems to be that you've used it as a resource, and I applaud you for thinking in that way, and putting it out there, because I think some people just look at those things and kind of brush them off as no, no, no. So, I think that's a good thing. Um, Amy had a question. She feels like this is a hard question to ask without assigning blame to someone. but what is something that could have changed your mind or perspective before your attempt? As a parent and school counselor, she worries about the kids who seem like they are fine, but they are truly at risk.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because you never really know, the ones that you're not suspecting of, where they're at mentally and emotionally. And I myself was one of those ones that no one really could tell where I was at mentally and emotionally. But I think it's important to really cultivate an atmosphere and an environment where mental health is normalized and these conversations are accepted and welcomed. So maybe the person that you don't suspect, might be struggling, going to them and letting them know that, hey, if you're ever going through anything that feels too much for you, that I am a resource available to you. Just sort of advocating that you are that resource, that you are available for them to help them could be really, monumental in terms of planting that seed in their mind. You never know when someone is going to come to you, but if you take the initiative to go to them first and you let them know that you are there to support them and that suicide is a conversation that you're comfortable having, can really make a difference. And ultimately, I always encourage people who work in school settings to pay attention to every type of kid and don't assume that um, that the tells that you're reading are 100% accurate. And just like we were talking about earlier, having that conversation, putting that conversation on the table before they come to you or before they present warning signs, is really important. Because had someone in my school, a counselor, a teacher, a coach, made it known that that was a conversation that we could have, um, I maybe would have went to them. I may not have remained quiet. I may not have felt like opening up was such a bad, scary thing. So taking that initiative could really make a difference for the kids who were sort of like me in a way.
Mm. It, the question, your answer, I think about, made me think about school and advertisement, right? Like somebody, I think somebody in the chat a little earlier, I read that they wish that 988 was advertised more. Um, and it made me wonder if there were advertisements about, helplines and things of that nature posted around your school. Did you see them? Did they have an effect? What was it? Had you ever thought about those kind of things?
So prior to my attempt, there were no mental health resources advertised on campus at all. 988 was still the 1-800 number prior to. And the first time that I ever heard about that number was when the musician Logic created that song, the 1-800 number song. That was the first time that I ever knew that a resource like that existed. There was no awareness of it, no advertisement of it. It was unknown to myself and to my peers and my community. Now they have advertisements of the 988 and the crisis hotline, which is fantastic. And I think had there been those advertisements on my school's campus, chances are I would have reached out. When you advertise a service that has trained professionals who are able to assist you, who don't know you personally, that's a big one for young people, the anonymous factor. I maybe would have considered reaching out to that number, and it could have made a difference. So I really encourage schools and people who work in schools to advocate for that and to promote that around campus, because you never know who's going to take that number down.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, I think it just made me think like, are these things being advertised and talked to, even if they're sometimes you get a feeling that young people aren't listening. But I think sometimes if you just put it there where they can see it and they're having a thought, then those things, they can just use those things, and maybe you never know that they use that thing, but they got it because it was there and it was available. So
Yeah, and also want to add to a lot of, and I saw this in the chat, it's a good point. A lot of young people are afraid of hospitalizations, which is, I know, protocol for school professionals and counselors. If you do a suicide assessment and someone acknowledges that they do feel suicidal, protocol is to, get them hospitalized, which I understand that that's the way that the systems are set up, but recognizing that a lot of young people are afraid of that outcome. And a lot of young people also are afraid of being in trouble by their parents, getting, disciplined for feeling that way. So just being mindful of the fears that a lot of young people have around these types of feelings can maybe kind of help, the professionals navigate those kinds of conversations better, to be able to say, hey, look, I know that you may be afraid of getting in trouble at home or maybe even going to the hospital, but I want you to know that if you're feeling this way, that I want to know about it. And we'll figure out what we're going to do about it later. But first things first, I want to know about that. I want you to come to me when you feel this way, and don't be afraid of the what ifs of what may happen or may not happen. Just be assured that I am here for you, can be really helpful as well, because kids have those fears. I would have had those fears had I known everything I know now. So it definitely makes sense why young people are hesitant to go to school professionals.
mhm, for sure, for sure, you make a very valid point. Thank you. Do a couple more questions. I want to be respectful of your time. Uh, Megan wanted to know if you had any advice for kids who are bullied, which seems to be a major factor these days.
Yes. I definitely dealt with bullies in middle school and a little bit in elementary school. And the advice that I will give kind of goes hand in hand with the advice that I was given that created a negative ripple effect in my life. The advice that was given to me, and again, no fault to anyone, you only know what you know, and they only knew what they thought was best to say. Um, but what they told me when I would express sadness and feelings of unhappiness because of bullies, they would tell me they're bullying you because they like you, or they're picking on you because they are jealous of you, or they are singling you out because, you know, they want, you to be their friend, but they just don't know how to go about it. I had a lot of boys kind of pick on me in middle school, and that was kind of the response always was, they just like you, they're just being mean to you because they like you and they don't know how to say it, which is innocent and sounds harmless, but what it actually did was make me feel like it was my responsibility to change something, to get my bullies to stop treating me that way. So I internalized it and made it my own problem, and in turn created this image, of, perfection. That way, no one could pick on me about anything. And I was, shielded from insecurity because I had this image of I'm perfectly fine, everything's fine. So it kind of created that negative coping skill within me. So I always tell people, when you know that bullying is happening, when you see that bullying is happening, really take it seriously and really acknowledge that words do hurt and they do have a deep, profound impact on others. And just retire that old thought that, sticks and stones break bones, words don't hurt. That is not the case. That is not true. And if you're noticing bullying, first and foremost, address the behavior. Make sure that the person who is bullying gets some help as well, to kind of navigate those behaviors, and then ultimately help the individual who is being bullied to overcome those big feelings. And if it's a young person, especially, no young person likes to be hurried out of a feeling. So let them feel the feeling. Let them sit with the feeling of being left out and being picked on, and let them know that those feelings are valid, I think is really important to do.
Thank you. I think you make a very valid point because, I think it's something that we do in society with a lot of things. We make things that people are dealing with, a victim, their issue that they're supposed to take care of. And when you're dealing with bullies, it should be outside people who handle the situation to make that person feel protected. And very valid point. So, last question before I get you out of here. People want to know how Emma's doing. How's Emma's recovery? What's going on with Emma? And they will also want to know where they can watch the full documentary of My Ascension.
So I am doing wonderful. I just celebrated, well, I just got married, so I just celebrated a new season of life. So I'm very happy, very blessed. I have so much joy and gratitude in my life, and such a beautiful life that I've been able to create and build since surviving my attempt. And hang on, I'm gonna plug my computer in really quickly. And yeah, I've just been on this mission ever since my attempt. I have really made it my life's mission and life's purpose to use my lived experience to try and make a difference in the world. So I've been able to travel the country sharing this documentary film, particularly with schools and students in schools, but also communities at large, to facilitate conversations like these and to open up dialogues where people can feel heard, seen, and ultimately safe with their vulnerabilities and their struggles. And I'm grateful to have been afforded opportunities that has lasted me almost 4 or 5 years at this point, traveling, sharing my story. That's what I do. That's what I love to do. It is my purpose. It is my passion. I get so much fulfillment out of sharing my story and helping others. And I hope to be able to continue my mission of making a difference and sharing my story in whatever capacity. So I'm doing great. And as far as getting access to the film, there are a few ways that you can access the film. The first one is by going to our website, myascension.us. You can access all of the film's options there. And then in turn of going to that website, you can also visit my website, which is emmaspeaks.org. And on that website, we can connect personally to talk about ideas of ways that you can innovatively bring suicide prevention efforts to your community. And we can work together to promote an event or host an event around my story and my ascension. So the two websites are myascension.us and then emmaspeaks.org. And those are the ways to get connected with my mission.
Awesome. Thank you so much for a very, very important conversation, Emma. It's great to hear that you're doing so well. Everybody is very thankful for your presentation. It was a wonderful, wonderful conversation. So thank you. I just want to remind everyone that we have another webinar presentation coming up next week. And Youth Move PA will be presenting on sources of strength. We hope to see you all then. Until then, everybody be well and take care. Thank you again, Emma, and we will talk to you all later.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for all the love.